Okay, hello everyone, welcome to today's episode. The title is Calling of the Collective Emergence. And in the subtitle, I've written Activating Humanitron. Now, that's something I'm going to explain close to the middle of the talk, but really, the calling of the collective emergence is a moment that I consider our species hasn't experienced yet. We have experienced individual, uh, you can say, disharmony and individual harmony, or being synchronized with the space. Now, we have experienced collective disharmony, but now collective harmony on a true level hasn't been experienced. That means we haven't seen the world as if it is completely peaceful, as if the collective's value is more significant than the individual. Right now, we're living in a world where our freedom means the individual is more important than the collective. The individual has to be free to do whatever. You know, it's as if stories of ancient Egypt and the pharaohs scared us from wanting to consider a collective, you know. You know, a person can define their whole life by a direction that only they can see. That's possible, that the person just lives in accordance to the inner realms and doesn't care for the outer realms. Kind of like you've come into a movie theater to see this collective event, but the person is like, imagine in the middle of the movie theater, you take out your phone and you're watching Netflix on your phone in the middle of the movie theater, you know? So I would say the individual calling is what makes the person lift up their head from their phone in the middle of a movie theater. You know, the collective event has more of a significance than the individual's outcome. You know, when the person is younger, there seems to be a greater gravitational pull of the ego. The self wants to be satisfied. You see very young children, the moment you take away their toy, they start crying. You give the toy back, the child is happy. This is, imagine a child so young that it doesn't have. The young child doesn't have a reference, doesn't have even an identity yet. It's going primarily by its feelings. I would say when it comes to our personal life, feelings are in the driver's seat. That means how we are emotionally suggests who the person is. But impersonally, it has nothing to do with the emotions of the person. There's so many things in this life that the quicker the person realizes, it has nothing to do with them. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say your work. Let's say, let's say, I don't know. Let's say you work for a company and you're a waiter. And as a waiter, there comes a customer that is incredibly rude, incredibly obnoxious. Now, the person, if they think the customer is being obnoxious to them specifically, they will get emotional. But if the person says, okay, I'm a waiter in a restaurant, the restaurant's credibility, the restaurant's um, is more important than just how I feel personally, you know? So the waiter or waitress has a professionality there, where it's a detachment from the role that is being played. Now the issue is, because we're not detached from the emotional roles of our inner realms, the outer realm gets blurry. Because the question should be, this is a question, if Michel Foucault, this French philosopher, was alive and I would see him, I would ask him that what is making the person feel nature is seeing the wrong thing. That means sometimes when I consider it, when you look at even the notion of enlightenment, the notion of a sort of mystical awareness to an ultimate clarity, it's as if like there was just a creature that emerged, language, gave it its meaning, and it has been walking in the labyrinth of ideological conception ever since. Imagine a bunch of people who have to live on an island, or a bunch of people who are stuck in an elevator, or a bunch of people who are, I don't know, in one room, or they have to live in that one room. What tends to happen is, if every person considers themselves more important, they separate. Anytime a person feels they're special or they are more than something, they separate themselves from it. That means if the person thinks they're, I don't know, an incredible violinist, and there's someone who is new to the violin, it's as if that, you can say there can be the arrogance of like not wanting to identify with where the person began. Until the individuals that are in the same room find some way of noticing the same room, they cannot work together. That means if everybody is in their own room, if people are just focused on their inner realms, and there isn't, you would, more than 50% contribution to the collective. I mean, you see, people are born in families and they seek families. If you were to look at what actually the main job of human beings is reproduction. And for reproduction, it requires community. It requires a society to be a family in, you know? It was Lao Tzu. He's like, if there's peace in the heart, there will be peace in the home. If there's peace in the home, there will be peace in the neighborhood. If there's peace in the neighborhood, there will be peace in cities. If there's peace in cities, there will be peace in nations. If there's peace in nations, there will be peace in the world. What does that mean? That means if the person seeks a global peace, they skip all the levels to that. That means the issue is people are climbing a mountain, but there's an elevator. When it comes to the inner realms and the nature of the attention changing, you know, this is a good question that I think everybody should ask. Everybody should go in front of the mirror and shout at their reflection in the mirror, who's your leader? That's it. Until the person realizes that they are the source mover. You are the prime mover of your attention. And unless the person can find a contentment with the space their attention is first being before they are manifest, I mean, that's one thing we don't consider. We're being the space before we're being the movement in it. Even the question comes, how can a person move without being conscious of a new space? How can you go to a new place? I mean, you need even that stepping stone on the river, between the river to, jump to. So the stepping stone requires to be there first. So unless the mind can create possibility, it doesn't act. And we can say that if there is people who are in this civilization doing rational, making rational decisions and irrational decisions, because that irrationality is real. Human beings are not, we're not calculators of meaning, where just a few ideas can be given to the person and they're a perfect calculation of the whole cosmos. It's not like that. It's I feel what it is again this antenna metaphor, and the notion of there being an I thought, that the more you are an idea, the more your phone is in like the underground parking where it doesn't get signal. The less you are a specific outcome of the day, the more you see different outcomes. That means imagine somebody told you you can win in only one way, or you can win in multidimensional ways. Which would you prefer? To win in only one view of reality, or to win in all views of reality, or in multiple views of reality? We can say if people on this planet follow people, we are doomed. Because the person comes from the world. The secrets of the future generations are hidden in the earth. What that means is the light bulb, to me, when Edison invented it, that was a hidden secret. Technically, Edison pulled out something from another dimension. From his inner realms, he envisioned the possibility of a design. And then he manifested it. That's the cool thing about the inventor's vision. Nikola Tesla, there was this quote I was reading the other day, where Nikola Tesla says, when there is, I don't know the exact wording he used, but the idea pretty much was that sometimes the person notices something, like a string to a unique idea. And when they pull it, suddenly it ends up being something. And there's a sacrifice. That means for me, I'll tell you, the idea for this YouTube channel, it came to me so indirectly. It was as if one day my mind fathomed and wondered, what would it be? Would it be possible even for a human being to give 10,000 lectures in a lifetime? You know? Of course, there has been people who have probably exceeded that number, but I'm saying, for me, it was a question for myself, and it was like a string that I could see the edge of, but I didn't know it was possible. And then as the person trusts these, I would say, rare strings, opportunities in life that are found, and they go with it in accordance not to per se their intellectual future consideration, but more based on based on the person's decency. That means it's like we're not robots. What that means is we don't just process linearly. We process non-linearly. And it doesn't mean the non-linear processing is accurate all the time, but I would say it's there has been moments I could tell you that I had a feeling to leave somewhere and something happened there, you know? So I could tell you there is another level to living that is literally, it can't be taught by a human to a human. It can only be remembered through self-reflection. That means when the person realizes all that they have thought to be their guru, their teacher, when you realize it has all been one moment of nature, then who is your guru? Then who is the teacher? Then who is the leader? Nature. Because we're natural beings, nature is our commander. What that means is if natural events change, we instantly listen to that instruction. When we see let's say you were living beside a volcano and you saw lava, you know, instantly nature's giving you an instruction, get out of here, you know, and the person starts running away from lava. There is a feeling, let us say, that perhaps could find the individual a feeling of the missing piece of the day. I would say a nostalgia of as if something the person has done in the future they just are not conscious of. I would say it would be that sort of a sort of future nostalgia. That's when I give these talks, specifically when I think about 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere. This inner realm future nostalgia is really the prime source of my voice. Because when we think about an individual, the individual tends to see everything else as individual. The moment you're an individual, others can be individual, you know. The moment you have a personality, you could look at a teddy bear, give it a personality. You could look at a tree, give it a personality. You could look at an animal and think it's exactly like a person of its own. Do you know what I mean? You know, like when you see a lot of pet owners, they, you know, it's like it's a humanized relationship. We are humanizing our environment in accordance to how our environment made us human, or told us or exposed to us how we are human. You see, now we're reaching a time where, just if you think about it, a person is in a battlefield in a silent battlefield, and information explosions are happening everywhere. You know, we have to move instantly from the teacher-student relationship to a sort of warrior dash designer species. There has been times where I've personally drawn art with a pen, and the way I have moved the pen, strangely, even though I was holding it in a regular way, the way I have moved it was as if I was fighting. I can tell you that there is so many things. It's like, especially when you look at the Vedic, the yogic view on karma. This is super fascinating. Where it's like there's a type of karma that is a pure accumulation. It's literally like a camera and what's recorded in the camera. You know, or you could say it's all the seeds planted in the soil of the mind through an attributeless witness. So all these impressions, sanskara, all these accumulated impressions, they give fruit. So right now, technically, from this view, a person is not their conscious mind. They are, from a Jungian interpretation of this yogic view, it would be like the unconscious is the reality. That means, imagine you were wearing a mask and you were looking in the mirror. You would see everything except your face. You would see every other part of your body as real, except the part of the face where it's covered. And because it is covered, because there is a mask, it doesn't mean there isn't a face there. You know, just because we think imagination is abstract doesn't mean that in subtler planes of this realm there isn't activity going on. You know, there's this quote, Terence McKenna, the scholar, says there's another tenant in the room. He's suggesting to intelligence, like there's another intelligence in this planet aside from human beings. Now, Mr. Within would say there isn't only another tenant, there is endless tenants in the room, in the cosmic room. You know, I mean, it is a sign of ignorance for us to see nature having such an creativity of bringing forth so many creatures. And we feel because nature has created individual beings, what? It's not going to create collective beings? We are that rare part of the cosmos that can experience individualism, collectivism, and the void. We are in the rarest place. This is the most unique part of the cosmos, I would say. It's the best place to build an airport. If we entertained a sort of multiverse, Earth, the way life opens up to itself, poetically in this universal sector, is through Earth. I look at my outer realms. I see only the Earth here. I don't see any human beings. I just see Earth moving. But in my inner realms is where Earth can also no longer be Earth. That means any person from any position of knowledge can instantly find the neutral unknown. That means it is better to be honest and not know, I would say, than to dishonestly know. There are so many levels to life that if we define life by one moment, it's like, what about all the other moments? If the person feels stressed and weak because of a snapshot of who they are in one moment, again, what about all the other moments the person's going to live? When I look at my past, I see a fool. When I look at the future, I see a genius I haven't met yet in the mirror. I feel individuals like drops in accordance to the design of the nature and the ecosystem. They find their way to the river or they evaporate. That means either human beings, they evaporate as individuals that never actually were in the world because they chose to be in their inner realms first, or only. And I would say just these drops, pretty much you got to live the mind is like a river. It has to be dynamic. I can't see any interpretation of the mind that doesn't have movement in it. This is why there is more deeper words than the mind. For example, the soul, or in Vedic thought, Atman, and then the Parabrahman, the individual soul, and the collective being, you know. So we are individuals. We can choose to be selfish, not care for the collective advancement, the collective emergence, and evaporate. That's pretty much what happens, you know. The person can go get their whole life, occupy themselves with hedonistic activities just to be like, okay, the drop evaporated at the end. No way, no way. you know. So whatever you do, if the more the person is, I would say, selfish, the easier it is to evaporate here. The more the person is selfless, the mind will move like a river. Your mind, I'm telling you, Bruce Lee, he gave a very important clue to his, I would say, to his art form even. He said, be like water. In that sentence, you see everything. You see mastery. What that means is water can move very gently between the rocks and a stream. Or like a waterfall, it can crash. What that means is, again, an ability to change, to pilot to different elevations and modes of being. There's this whole movement going on that is called psychedelic therapy. This is something that I remember seeing this documentary, and it showed a bunch of people who had lived in the city went to the Amazons. They went to this Amazons to live this quiet life in nature. And the whole documentary was that it was like a bunch of people who went, but one of the people didn't come back. You know? And so it's these people who have lived these very, you can say, mechanical, kind of monotone lives in society, in the city. And when they went through these shamanic ceremonies where it was as if they would, I don't know, brew the roots of a tree. Um, I'm not really sure how they extract ayahuasca, like like how an exact shaman makes ayahuasca, but I would say they have this kind of like tea or some sort of psychedelic brew. And so, as the person goes through this ayahuasca experience, when you actually listen to what the whole shamanic thing was to evoking something superior than the sensory linearity where the suffering seems to be arising from. What does that mean? That means pretty much back in the day too, even now it's the same. A ritual and a ceremony was a permission slip. That means all the people you have ever seen who have done ritualistic, ceremonial, even religious people included, in regards to prayer, it has been a permission. We repeat actions if we feel they are permitted to ourselves. Same thing, it's like, why doesn't a person eat a food that doesn't taste good to them? You know? Because the person gets a feedback from the experience and then decides. There's a declaration of value. If you don't have this declaration of value, if you become, there's no such thing as conscious non-duality, I would say. If you're conscious, there is non-dual awareness, but there's no such thing as consciousness of non-duality, because the nature of consciousness is attention to form. That means the moment there is no form, but there's just awareness, then it's no longer consciousness. Consciousness requires a conditional position. And in this modern time, we tend to say it's neurological, biological. The body is the god of the mind. But in ancient times, it was the other way. So I would say those people who went to the Amazons, they went towards this ayahuasca ceremony. Evidently, in this ceremony, there was, I haven't experienced this personally, but I'm saying it, the documentary, I'm just relaying what was there. That these people take this, drink this psychedelic tea, and they go into these states where this feminine, not feminine, the spirit of Mother Earth approaches the person. And I think what tends to happen usually, I mean, it's like, whether you call it, I mean, technically, you are disturbing the body to discover how your mind isn't disturbed. Or how your mind could never be disturbed, because the mind isn't an object. It can't break. It can't even be destroyed, because it has to be something first before it can be destroyed. You know? The mind is energy. I would say awareness and energy are the same. That means mind and matter, um, if they are not mind and matter, are the same. That means whether the person thinks they're an object, projecting a subject, or they are this unknown free will of a subject moving the object. Eventually, it will be seen where I would say this is the one of the things no teacher in the educational system ever said. I think most teachers are afraid. Not that they're afraid. They just don't know if they say it, what else they can say. You know. And what it is the original blind spot. Every ideological system has an original blind spot that is ignored. I would say, for example, being a person who has experienced religion, um, and who has lived in a religious country, my background's from Iran, I would tell you that the original blind spot of the religious narrative, I'm just commenting on the narrative, not on what the narrative means. That's everybody's eyes animate words differently. But for me, there's this thing of, where was Earth made? Before man, let's say Adam and Eve, in the religious narrative, there was a mistake made, you know? And, after Adam and Eve fell, God was very merciful. Before, wasn't. There was a sort of um, punishment. And so what happened is that God creates, in the religious narrative, makes man from clay, perceive it metaphorically as elements, and imbues it its own breath, with its own breath, imbues life in this animate, in this clay, and then commands man to repeat the names, all the names in the cosmos. There's something like this in the religious narrative, a geometry to the core of the design of the thought. And what it is that, just take this in, guys. When Adam and Eve, there was a mistake made, the forbidden fruit and whatnot. Where did Adam and Eve fall to? Pretty much Earth. Where was Earth made? And this gives me the notion that Theologists have missed out, theologians have not noticed that everything is in heaven. That means if you see the whole universe as an organism, we are the imagination of nature. Nature is real, but we are the imagination of nature. So what it is Earth is in heaven. When it comes to location, just the locality, how the human being conceives the notion of a location, where is the location? That means I would say, where is the ultimate truth standing before there is an illusion? I'll give you an example. For example, I'll say, and because I perceive myself to be uh, like I consider myself to be my own greatest fan and my own greatest critic. You know, and if I was to point out the Mr.Within original blind spot, it would just be that when you go within, you're no longer a Mister. You're no longer uh, uh, sound mouth noises. You're no longer a name in the void. So what that means is wondering where all your views on living are being instantly. And those who discover and who I would say they are blessed to be instantaneously gifted by the unknown. That means they find instant moments where they notice the unknown. They can watch. Uh, the statement is see it more like a riddle, but they can watch space move before matter. Those who realize that, I would say that's literally like a blessing, like a mystical blessing. If you can realize in the unknown in an instant, you were free before you were born. As language just known in a certain way. So calling of the collective emergence means a choice has to be made. Does the drop want to evaporate or does the drop want to find the river? If the drop finds the river, it will change the drop. We either die as individuals or continue as a collective. Pretty much that's to say it very simply, that's the route. That's what's worked so far. Now, the more intelligent we become, you can say there is an advantage and disadvantage to that. The disadvantage is if we choose to fight and we're becoming more intelligent, every human being every day is becoming more intelligent. If we choose to be cruel, chaos will become the king of the realm. If we choose to be advanced, order was here before order has ordered chaos to be chaos. That's what happens. Because you see, let's say a good guy and a bad guy, a good guy is walking. I mean, let's say person A is walking and person A is a good, like, decent person. And person B who is an indecent person. As person A is walking, person B just comes and pushes person A down. You know? Person A has an ordered nature. That means being in balance makes more sense than being in an imbalance. So person A doesn't do anything. Because if they do, they lose their balance. They don't only lose their outer ability, they lose their inner ability as well. Now, let's say this event takes place, person B leaves, person A leaves. Now, person B Let's say person B slapped person A for no reason, out of nowhere, and person A just freaked out and ran away. You know? Now, person B is the archetype of chaos in this context. So let us say person B, what tends to happen is that a greater chaos will come and slap the inferior chaos. Inferior chaos is punished by greater chaos. Inferior order is punished by greater order. And when I say punished, you see the concept of punishment, when I thought about it, I'm like, it also arises from religion to some degree, I would say. Because when I think about the concept of guilt, do you know? It's like there has to be some sort of ideological, it's like as we are like an object breathing in the moment, simultaneously we're being a subject in a realm that our attention adjusts instantly. That means if you're listening to me and what I'm saying is you're understanding what I'm saying, that means your mind is a great filmmaker. And it has managed, as I'm speaking, to see an image behind the words. Because that's the secret to speech, guys. If you don't see an image, you don't know what you're listening to. The human being, tell me what is easier, to look at a photo and remember it, or to look at a page of sentences, and let's say you have 10 seconds to look at it. You know, which is easier to remember? So this is perfect. Oh my God, this is an incredible example here. Let's say we write a one-page description of a sunset, and then we have a picture of a sunset. Now, imagine a person looks at these two simultaneously. Which one retains more? The person may not have time or an ability to read all the words, to have heard every sentence, every word accurately, you know? But the person who perceives in images, you remember images, you know? This is the secret to long-term memory. That the more abstract it is, the more memorable it is. And especially when set into motion in a journey or context. The person remembers journeys easily, if you notice. Out of all the things the person can remember, journeys, conscious moments where I was going from one point to another point, those are so easily memorable. You know, the journey is memorable, but the as an image, you know, because it was an experiential image. So I would say writing, it is an art form, but it is also, I mean, it's not just writing. Just language is it's an Iron Man suit. If we think we're the Iron Man suit, you know, it's as if like it would have been better if Tony Stark had never stepped into the Iron Man suit. But if the person realizes, okay, I'm in this Iron Man suit, and I can step out of it, that the person, when the moment somebody speaks to you, it's so instantly you can be an I thought, you can be an individual point. But when you're in silence, going for a walk in nature like Lao Tzu and Confucius, you know, it seems we suffer in accordance to how we extract patterns of meaning from what we see. So guys, now I'm going to talk about what I mean by activating Humanitron. Okay, so it's a playful thing, the subtitle. You know, we have the Transformer movie, Now, I've started to fathom, like, imagine human beings, like this whole coronavirus situation is making us wear masks. I feel this is the beginning of pioneering people walking in suits. Imagine the world could potentially become so polluted. In certain countries, it's so polluted. Imagine that people, the wealthiest people, are wearing suits where in that suit the air is perfect. The suit has perfect air. Do you know? But everybody else is like breathing, suffering. So it would be the idea of the Humanitron. It's this notion where I had where imagine people have suits. What's the next progression? That means I thought what comes after the Iron Man suit. The next thing that comes after the Iron Man suit is an Iron Man house. That means imagine Tony Stark, literally, he didn't have to move his body in the Iron Man suit. He could have just sat in a room, drank tea, checked his phone, and he could have just built a bigger suit, and the suit could have done everything. He could have even developed some anti-shake so the suit could, imagine, turn around, imagine be upside down, but he would still stay there in that room drinking tea. You know what I mean? So it would be like, and from an Iron Man suit to an Iron Man room. Now, if we thought, again, another leap of evolution of where do we go from these like room Iron Man suits, like imagine much larger. And an example of this would pretty much be like the Pacific Rim robots or something. That's a good example. Now, what would be the next thing from that? Okay, it would be, I perceive it just as a connection where what is cooler than one Iron Man suit? It's like a bunch of Iron Man suits connecting and making a more, you know, giant Iron Man suit or something, right? So I would say Humanitron is how every human being is like, imagine like a bee where we're making a hive. What we're making this hive, instead of bees, every human being in an Iron Man suit. And we want to make the great Iron Man suit, the Iron Man suit of the civilization, which inevitably would be the evolution beyond sky cities, from jumping cities to sky cities to interstellar uh, planetary ships. Star Wars kind of got close to that, you know, where it's as if when we can live in space. Can you imagine literally like we were like, all right, let's stop living on Earth, and we were just living. Like, imagine giant space colonies. Just like, imagine a space station. Now, imagine that space station being like, like, imagine so much infrastructure in space that it's literally like we're treating space like land. Imagine the future. People are gonna sell, real estate in outer space. All right, man, from the sun to the earth, that space is like, what? How much are we gonna sell? So I would say that the humanitron is just the idea that if all human beings were seen, their individual contribution to their collective civilization was seen as like an Iron Man suit of a contribution. It's as if this Iron Man suit uh, pretty much it's like this. It's like there's an experience of individual inferiority, individual superiority. Then there is collective inferiority. Then there is collective superiority. We right now are going from individual superiority to collective inferiority. That means the first collective, it's like, you could say world peace is like step 5. Before world peace, there needs to be, like, imagine 4 other steps of collective engagements, activities. Not per se peaceful activities, but collective efforts. As if we have a day where, I don't know, everybody on the planet has to, I don't know, has to build something. What it means is a shift of identity. That means if the person doesn't want to be something, what are they? I think that's a really healthy question. That a person wonders, if they did nothing, who would they be? If they did everything, who would they be? And all the variations in between. Because I keep asking myself, what is the point of 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere? And not from even a metaphysical standpoint, just physically, what is the point of 8 billion creatures on a rock? What can 8 billion creatures on a rock do? So that's where the calling of the collective emergence comes. When we have lived enough as an individual, we will care for the collective. If the person has not lived enough as an individual, it doesn't make sense to them, the collective. The rebel makes more sense. A sort of rebellious attitude to the realm. So let us say the advanced civilization is a giant robot. And we, with our Iron Man suits, are going and getting different chunks of metal like bees or something, trying to build this ultimate, at least archetype. That means it's like the hierarchy is incomplete. We don't know how far the human being can go because we haven't even experienced a sort of collective inferiority to even know what it's like. It has to be event-based. That means it's an attendance. Life is something you have to attend to. You have to consciously, in your waking state, attend to it. Notice it. Notice that it's alive. So, guys, I'm going to read, I'm going to go into a quote tunnel of the word collective, just to see how the inner realms of different people on this planet has opened to the idea of collectivity. Elon Musk. Really, the only thing that makes sense is to strive for greater collective enlightenment. Elie Wiesel. No human race is superior. No religious faith is inferior. All collective judgments are wrong. Only racists make them. All collective judgments are wrong. Okay. So technically she's making a collective judgment. When you say all collective judgments are wrong, that's a collective judgment. This is one of the most unique sentences. Wow, all collective judgments are wrong. That sentence is a paradox. We have found a true paradoxical sentence, guys. This is like a rare event in language. All collective judgments are wrong. Guys, I'm going to dedicate an episode to this. Just making a note. But I see what she's trying to say there. She's trying to say, like, we got to realize we're human beings before we are ideologically blind to, we ideologically desensitize ourselves to what natural, simple living is. I'm telling you guys, this world, passion is the roar of the human being. In whatever form it finds you, if you honor the spirit of your craft or your art form, or whether it's martial arts or whatever you do, even if it's flipping burgers, you just honor the moment and just simply attend to your task, you will see honor is returned in this realm. Patrice Coulors. Patrice Coulors says, I was trained within a black radical tradition that encouraged struggle within our own movements because it sharpens collective analysis, bringing us closer to the tools we need to achieve liberation. Emil Durkheim. Religious representations are collective representations which express collective realities. A potential collective reality. H.L. Mencken says democracy is a pathetic belief in the collective wisdom of individual ignorance. Okay, this is satire. So. Collective wisdom, I mean, that's the thing about wisdom. I don't know how many people, I think wisdom to a lot of people, it means more knowledge. But to me, wisdom is noticing the emptiness of any system. That means if you know that there is no bus coming, that is wisdom. You know, if you're waiting at a bus stop, you know. If you realize that this world is natural and creatures and nature emerges, it has an opportunity for some time to be an advanced phenomena, and then it descends back into simplicity. So we ascend towards complexity, then oh my god, the roller coaster's going down. Carl Jung, commander of the minds, of a great commander on the battlefields of the mind. The collective unconscious consists of the sum of the instincts and their correlates, the archetypes. Just as everybody possesses instincts, so he also possesses a stock of archetypal images. You see, in that he is keeping karma alive. In a good, like he's sharing the insight, ancient insight, with that one quote. Because what it means is nobody as a mind, as a subject is alone. No subject exists alone. Names can arise from the middle of nowhere in the attention of an unknown mover in the none. Carl Jung says, we shall probably get nearest to the truth if we think of the conscious and personal psyche as resting upon the broad basis of an inherited and universal psychic disposition, which is as such unconscious, and that our personal psyche bears the same relation to the collective psyche as the individual to society. Yeah, pretty much in a yogic way, they were saying just like how the society is like the mind of the individual, of the physical individual, is like an influential mind. Okay, just like how we have space for matter, um, mind is space. Mind is space. So it is there way before matter, I would say. Carl Jung says that our personal psyche bears the same relation to the collective psyche as the individual to society. Pretty much, Carl Jung is saying our egos are fractal. Yeah, I think that's maybe a better way. I mean, he says, we shall probably get nearest to the truth if we think of the conscious and personal psyche as resting upon the broad basis of an inherited and universal psychic disposition. So even though the person is their own unique biological being, but their potential and their DNA, of course, is inherited. So I think Carl Jung is trying to wonder about the universal inheritance of the individual mind that thinks a story of Earth is enough. Audrey Hepburn. I don't believe in collective guilt, but I do believe in collective responsibility. Bertrand Russell. Collective fear stimulates herd instinct and tends to produce ferocity towards those who are not regarded as members of the herd. Eckhart Tolle says the personal ego already has a strong element of dysfunction, but the collective ego is frequently even more dysfunctional to the point of absolute insanity. Okay, collective ego, he means the world story pretty much is insane. Yeah, at that time, like right now, when I think about like the responsibility of intelligence on this planet, it's as if we stopped caring. The moment you stop caring for something, I will tell you, it's like your intelligence is absent. What does that mean? That means think of how many times a person um, has spoken, or someone's been speaking to someone and the person's attention has went somewhere else. Literally, they didn't care to try to figure out what are these sounds coming out from this other being in front of me. Their attention goes somewhere else. So what does that mean? That means if you don't care, you don't see. Eckhart Tolle says in the West, as well as some other parts of the world, the personal sense of ego tends to predominate, whereas in other areas there is a more collective sense of ego. This collective ego emphasizes the we rather than the I. Calvin Coolidge. Duty is not collective, it is personal. Harry S. Truman. Upon books, the collective education of the race depends. They are the sole instruments of registering, perpetuating, and transmitting thought. And guys, writing is, if we as a species forget writing, if people stop writing in notebooks, I will tell you it would be like losing an ancient technology. Lily Tomlin says reality is nothing but a collective hunch. Marshall McLuhan. Ideally, Oh no, Marshall McLuhan, as the unity of the modern world becomes increasingly a technological rather than a social affair, the techniques of the arts provide the most valuable means of insight into the real direction of our own collective purposes. You know, like I could totally see in the future, imagine like there's the first human football team facing a robotic football team. You know, and the robotic football team is they're designed to be able to be destroyed by human beings or whatever. You know what I mean? Let's say a robotic company is showing off how human their robots could be, right? And so we have the first football match between a team of robots, that very humanoid looking robots, and humans, right? And imagine it's the halftime mark and the coach is like speaking to the team, the human team. The human coach is speaking to the human team, you know, and the coach says to the person, "Are you gonna let a robot take you down? Are you gonna let a robot take you down?" You know what I mean? And you know, and the football player's like, "No, no!" Like this intense kind of fury arises, you know. And that's the thing. It's like, are we gonna let robots live our lives for us? And if we do, we will lose the wisdom that we were natural once upon a time. That before the concept of digital existential confusion existed, we were nature's winds, attributelessly being the earth. Because you see, that's the cool thing. When I think about my mind, it is not an object. I can't like put my mind on the table and like look at, like hold it in my hand and be like, oh my god, is this my mind? Like I can't, I can't do that. So the mind is space. It's intelligence plus space, or intelligence through space. So then the person's like, wait a minute, if I am not my name, if I am not just the story I have accepted without review, then we are the mind of the universal sector, disguised as a human being for a little while. Marshall McLuhan says, ideally, advertising aims at the goal of programmed harmony among all human impulses and aspirations and endeavors. Using handicraft methods, it stretches out towards the ultimate electronic goal of a collective consciousness. Gloria Steinem, women's progress has been a collective effort. Marilyn Manson, the word Antichrist to me is the collective disbelief in God, okay? Steven Spielberg, you may have years ahead of you to create the dreams that we can't even imagine dreaming. You have done more for the collective unconscious of this planet than you will ever know. Deepak Chopra, and for me anyway, consciousness is three components. A personal component, which for lack of a better word we can call the soul. A collective component, which is more archetypal and a deeper level, and then a universal domain of consciousness. Yeah, guys, in most wisdom traditions, it's a triangular relationship. It's a trio. Whether in just I don't know how to say it. There's like chaos, order, and then something witnessing it is the third. You know. Will Smith, I think with movies I'm really connecting to the Joseph Campbell idea of the collective unconscious. So evidently Carl Jung was chopped liver then. Reinhold Niebuhr. Evil is not to be traced back to the individual, but to the collective behavior of humanity. Neil Donald Walsh. You'll find individuals agreeing on this, but when they get into collective societies and larger groups, they find it difficult to achieve group agreement. Yeah. because really it's hard. You want to be defined. The group has to have a certain ideal to define itself. But if you want a bunch of groups to, like imagine a bunch of the nations to unite, they have to see a new level to a new level of ideals that surpasses their own ideals. What does that mean? That means I saw this in Iran. Do you know? There was a car crash. I was in the car was passing. I saw the car crash. This car was in an accident, and people in the street, like I'll tell you this, in Iran, um, the police is not like here in Canada when there's an emergency instantly come, you know? Because there's traffic jams, there's so many things, there's even just the moral responsibility I would say it's just not even the moral responsibility, but there's like the police are not instant in their response. Because they're not instant in the response, when something happens, people instantly help. People instantly help, you know? And it was the scene where there was this crash and people were running. I just remember this as a kid in my mind, being in a car, seeing that people were running to assist the moment. And what does that mean? That means they were people. Everybody has a life. You know, everybody's doing something when they leave. They have a sort of direction to their life. But in the middle of their own direction of life, they notice something is in dysfunctional for a collective. Do you know? It's our empathy that really makes us. That means, can you imagine a fireman that doesn't have empathy? That would technically be a robot. But the fireman uh, has a humanity that is the passion of saving. You know. Samantha Power. Okay. Sorry, guys. Let's see what else. Bernie Sanders says if we are going to reverse the race to the bottom, workers must have the right to engage in collective bargaining. Uh, okay. Samantha Power says when we blame all Muslims, all Syrians, or all members of any other group because of the actions of individuals, we fall into the trap of asserting collective guilt. We empower the narrow-minded ideology that we're trying to defeat. Jesse, oh my god, I think the quotes are becoming way more political. There's this quote from Ben Shapiro. It says, the greatest obstacle to the welfare state is not greed, but private charity that makes the welfare state irrelevant. The greatest obstacle to re-education of children in the name of the collective is allegiance to a higher power. More than that, the greatest obstacle to the state is God is an actual God above the state. Okay. Guys, I would say Ram Dass has this saying, when you hug a tree, when you embrace a tree, you are embracing yourself. And if human beings realize we're just creatures here, and the language is making us want to uh, break. Auguste Comte. The only real life is the collective life of the race. Individual life has no existence except as an abstraction. Wow. There we go. Somebody finally said what was on my mind. Zlatan Ibrahimovic. If I had an ego as big as the Eiffel Tower, would I have won this many collective trophies? I know people like to talk about it, and okay, I'm not going to answer every story, but maybe I will let my collective trophies speak for themselves. I don't know many other footballers who have won as much. You see, there is this thing, guys, that to define oneself too specifically is also to separate oneself from the general. Anthony Doerr says that's the power of fiction, that it can take the collective and make it personal. Federico Fellini. To people of my generation, the picture show was really another dimension, central, whimsical. No uniforms or collective rights, but a place where little boys like me could laugh and feel free. Haruki Murakami. I think history is collective memories in writing. I'm using my own memory and I'm using my collective memory. Wow. This quote is excellent. Christ Novoselic. Christ Novoselic. It felt like being in the center of the world, and I felt like I was a witness to history, and I knew that the whole world was watching on television, so I could feel the collective consciousness of the world focus on this little strip of land called Seattle. Okay. Stanislav Grof says ancient eschatological texts are actually maps of the inner territories of the psyche that seem to transcend race and culture and originate in the collective unconscious. Randy Weingarten says, where educators are raising and combining their voices, the seeds of positive change have emerged. Collective voice, exercised through the union, is power. The power to drive real change for our kids' families. I mean, when he said union, that yeah, I mean, of course, collectivity is important, you know. If people are not honest with the collective system can't honestly treat them, you know. That means there has to be honest on an individual level before we can experience the greatness of the collective, really. I think honestly, calling of the collective emergence is pretty much a creature in the void being like, what am I doing here? And realizing that if the mind can give access to a potential, following that potential is the only truth. That's what has been happening. Nobody just looking at it. We are, if you saw the human being like a storage device, there's no way we can store all the information in the world to process it accurately. So the sooner we can realize that how the human mind contains the world is strangely incomplete from in the outer realms, there has to be an effort to step out of the Iron Man suit of selfishness, or the inner self being the inner, not the inner self, but I'll say, like, if you can step out of the Iron Man suit of language that is defining your realm and perceive the silent earth and the silence where all sounds, all concepts, all expressions of meaning have arose from, that silence is really the truth of truth. The truth of vocalized truth is silent truth. And the silence doesn't have a categorized truth. It's an event, a conscious experiential event. Like, I'm even saying the word experiential, but it's like like a drop talking about a river. It's like when the drop is in the river, there is no drop. There is no me when there is humanity, you know? Because it's not really worth it to feel we are alive, but not to actually care to see the world progress. I mean, it's becoming easier for people to leave the city than to actually stay in it and fix it. That means if everybody takes the strategy, all right, I got to get out of this city and go into nature, then there's nobody in the city to do anything. That means if we all wanted to be free from our, urban suffering, there would be nobody to move society. And so what it is there was this saying, it was like relationship advice to couples. And the advice was pretty much this, uh, this granddaughter had gone to her grandparents and asked them, the grandparents had been married for many years, like, I don't know, 50 years or something, a very great marriage, you know? And the granddaughter said, how did you guys do it, you know? How did you guys keep the marriage going? And both of them responded, and that, like, this is the moral of the story, that we were alive at a time where when things broke, we would fix it rather than replace it. And all those people who want to avoid the responsibility of being a human being and designing an advanced civilization, you know, who avoid it to go into nature, I'm telling you, you may, of course, life is different. Perhaps go in nature, but do not forget why we're human beings. You know, for me, this is the view. Uh, be a bhakti yogi as much as you want, but after you're done being non-dual, uh, non-dual bliss, non-dual attributeless bliss, then you'll realize the value of being an individual. That it's a rare occurrence. That means if the person feels they are an eternal being, then there's nothing to do. This is an opportunity. That means, think of it this way. Think of it, we have survival of the fittest, or the concept of just survival, okay? And we have this view, how do we ask this question, how does a temporary being survive? And how does an eternal being survive? When we think of the temporary being, very clear how the temporary being survives, you know? But when we think about what does an eternal being need to do to survive, the eternal being needs no purpose. It is all purposes. So what I'm saying is, if you were non-dual eternity, there has been nothing to do for eons, now there is. If you are a temporary, if you are a dualistic, temporal consideration, then the only thing left is to see, while you're temporary, what you can, how far you can go, and how far the species can further its vision into the unknown. That is really it. Whether people know it or not, they're either serving the body of the advanced civilization or they're serving its mind. And I would say the ultimate truth arrives. If the person is not willing to see ability right where they are, if the person chooses to see themselves as incapable, then the world has no reason to see you as able. That means if the person can't authorize something for themselves, they can't see it in others. I think the most truest statement I've ever heard, and I don't know from where, but it was something like, until you have tasted victory, you have no clue what's going on. Something around those lines. We are alive now, yet we are either suffering from because of our past, or you know, running towards the future. But to live selflessly and build an advanced civilization, now that's a masterpiece. And once the person masters peace, every moment becomes a masterpiece, I will tell you. Once the person just looks at the realm and I would say instantly accepts, okay, it is okay to be simple and peaceful here. Your mind will serve you if you honor the realm. Because the mind knows its source. The body is lost in change. A calling is receiving a signal like an antenna, but a signal that is perhaps more emotionally justified until the journey is made and there is content to the emotion. I feel all human beings are called towards advancing the communication on the surface of this rock. And if they do not trust their inner realms and share naturally, we have missed out on our own mind's evolution. The evolution of intelligence, I would say. That is the game. That's why we are all looking for information. This is why we listen and speak. Because everything is defined through form, and we're just designs passing through. You know, there are moments where the person cannot attain. And if in moments where the world, that whether the inner realms or the outer realms ignores the being, those who can be preferenceless cultivate the ability to perceive any preference. If you're an ego, the only way to be fully control is the ego will try to be a god. That means it's like either in, I would say, an archaic way, either God is in charge or man is in charge. And when we think of the idea of man, you see, this is the most fascinating thing, that if the idea of God was man-made, that means the idea of man who has conceived the idea of God is also man-made. So technically, we reach a paradox. The language simulation starts glitching. The linguistic simulation perhaps is paused. And what can I say about peace? When you realize the world can be peaceful, you can be peaceful too. But if the person feels the world can't have something, I will tell you, they will never have that. I'm telling you, if there is an intent from a mind to take, the universe is literally saying this person's inputting a taking archetype. All right, echo it back. You know what I mean? That means imagine in an empty room you shout, excuse my language, but imagine in an empty hallway you shout, fuck you, you know? And suddenly you see your echo is saying, fuck you. You know? So what it is like the action echoes back as it was inputted. So if you hate, like let's say you, I would tell you, let's say if you hate making food, you will probably eat food from people who hate making food too. Do you know, like the input, the activity, let's say the archetype pattern is being inputted, you know, is being kept alive. I remember this was something that it took me a while to realize, but I was explaining it to my father one day. And I was saying that there should be no reason for a person to vocalize their inefficiency. No reason. That means it's unacceptable in a karmic system to vocalize inefficiency. Maybe if there's a real rhythm behind it in the moment, then the person can. But I would say to vocalize and to it, like somebody once said, when some people they bond through misery, some people bond through joy. okay, or celebration, you know. Those people who bond with misery, the content of their speech is how they have been incapable, you know. That means here's the levels. If the person is let's say decent, they talk about their own misery. If the person is indecent but still miserable, they speak about the misery of others. Because the way this life is designed, first there needs to be an attention to yourself, then an attention to others. Then when there's a attention to others, the self sees what is different from how the world is different to it. Then it updates. I don't know who it was, but this person said every generation creates its own work of art and it is unique to that generation. And people should perceive we can't not be artists. Let me tell you why. Because we are in the business of novelty. That means I don't know how we can define the new. Think about it. Think about how the dictionary can define the new. It never can. It can't define novelty because it has to use the past to define it. So the concept new is the pure unknown. That means I think in the future there's going to be protests about, the definition of the word novelty in the dictionary. See, you look at the definition of novelty in the dictionary, guys. Check it out. The quality of being new. A new or unfamiliar thing. It's just the unknown. Anytime you notice you are functioning in a known mode and you suddenly notice there's something else, that's the unknown. That's an added dimension. And when you realize the whole cosmos is unknown, you're like, am I in an all you can eat buffet of endless ways to conceive form as meaning? Here, the definition of new: produced, introduced, discovered recently. Trying so hard to say it's unknown, not to say it's unknown. Yeah. Check this out. It says already existing but seen, experienced, or acquired recently or now for the first time. This could be as if like, yeah, in regards to a discovery, that means technically a discovery is not it's a discovery to the temporary. It's only a discovery to the person who's discovered it. To nature, it's as if like, what new? It's like there's nothing new about change. Anyways, guys, I hope this episode was helpful. I'm going to be around in the Discord for a little while for those interested or who have questions. Anyways, thanks for listening. And the calling of the collective emergence really means, all right, you've lived as an individual, you've lived for yourself, and let's say the child is self-obsessed. All people have to be self-obsessed to physically maintain how they are, existing, surviving. But I would say it's like, let us see how far the mind of 8 billion unknown moments. Let us see like what happens if the species puts its foot on the gas pedal and every every system which is a spectrum of value or a hierarchy or some sort of field We have to free ourselves from the self that was never free. That is the ultimate. You are freedom incarnate. Let us build the Iron Man suit of the species, Humanitron. All right, guys. Blessings.